Alright, picture this for a second. A man is crossing a desert, and he's rich, but not rich the way we think of rich today. Not a nice house and a nice car. Rich in a way that's honestly a little hard to imagine. He's got 100 camels walking behind him, and every single one is loaded down with gold. Bags of it. Gold dust, gold bars, just gold. And as he travels town to town, he gives it away. To poor people, to strangers, to anyone who holds out a hand. He's handing out gold like you or I might hand out sweets. In fact, he gives away so much of it on this one single trip that he accidentally breaks the economy of an entire country for years. So, who does that? Who is this man? Well, a lot of people will tell you he was the richest human being who ever lived. Richer than any king, any emperor, any billionaire you could name today. His name was Mansa Musa, and he ruled a huge kingdom in West Africa about 700 years ago. But here's the strange part, the part that makes this story worth telling. This man, a man some people call the richest in all of history, was almost completely forgotten. For hundreds of years, most of the world didn't even know his name. This is World's Richest, where we don't just tell you who had the money, we tell you what really happened to it. First time here? Go ahead and subscribe. It's free. And today, the whole story of the richest man who ever lived and how the world forgot him. So let's start with the obvious question. How does anyone get that rich? And the nice thing is, this one isn't a mystery. There's a simple answer. One word. Gold. Musa's kingdom, the Empire of Mali, sat on top of some of the richest goldfields in the world. And back then, gold was everything. But here's the part people forget. Mali had something else too, something that, in the desert, was almost as precious as gold. Salt. Sounds funny now, but if you lived in the heat of West Africa, with no fridge and no way to keep food, salt kept you alive. People needed it. And the great desert to the north had mountains of it. So this was the deal that made Mali rich. Traders brought salt down across the Sahara, great slabs of it, so heavy the camels could only carry a few at a time. Mali had the gold, and they traded one for the other. In some places, the stories say, they traded salt for gold, pound for pound, equal weight. That's how badly the world wanted both. There's even a lovely old tale about how it worked. The gold miners were so secretive about where their gold came from that they wouldn't meet the traders face to face. So the traders would leave their salt on a riverbank and walk away. The miners would come, leave gold beside it, and vanish. The traders came back, and if the gold looked fair, they took it. Nobody spoke. Nobody was cheated. A whole fortune, changing hands in silence. And every time gold and salt met, somewhere in the middle sat the king of Mali, taking his cut of all of it. That's it. That's the secret. No magic, just gold and salt and a very good spot on the map. And what a spot it was. Mali wasn't some little kingdom. At its height, it stretched across a huge slice of West Africa, a piece of land bigger than most countries on Earth today, covering parts of a dozen modern nations. Millions of people, all of it, in the end, answering to one man. And that one man, well, here's a strange little thing about how he even got the throne. Musa came from the royal family of Mali, going back to the great warrior king who first founded the empire. But he wasn't first in line. According to one old account, the king before him became obsessed with a single question. He'd heard that the great ocean to the west went on forever. And he wanted to know, was that true? Did it have an edge? So, the story goes, he built a huge fleet of boats, filled them with men and food and gold, and sailed off west into the open Atlantic to find the end of the sea. He was never seen again. Now, is that story true? Honestly, we can't know. It's one man's account, written down long after. But that's how Musa got his crown. The king sailed off chasing the edge of the world, and left Mansa Musa in charge of everything. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, but how rich are we actually talking? And this is where I have to be honest with you. because you'll see numbers online. People love to say $400 billion. They love to say he was richer than Elon Musk, richer than Jeff Bezos, richer than anyone alive today. And look, maybe, but the truth is, nobody really knows. You can't put a real number on it. There were no bank accounts back then, no stock market. Historians who've spent their lives on this just throw up their hands and say the same thing. His wealth was beyond counting, beyond measure. And honestly, a number wouldn't capture it anyway, because Musa didn't have money sitting in an account somewhere. He had gold coming up out of the ground, year after year, and a whole empire paying him, forever. His wealth wasn't a pile you could weigh. It was more like a river that simply never stopped flowing. So instead of a number, let me just tell you what he actually did, and you can decide for yourself. Now, Musa wasn't a warrior king, out conquering land for the fun of it. He was, more than anything, a deeply religious man, a builder, and someone genuinely curious about the wider world beyond his own desert. And it was that faith and that curiosity that set this whole story in motion. Because in the year 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make a journey. As a Muslim, he wanted to make the great pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, a trip of thousands of miles across the whole Sahara. But Musa didn't travel light. Now, I have to warn you, a lot of this comes from old writers, telling stories years after the fact. So the exact numbers, take them with a pinch of salt. But even if they're half true, they're incredible. They say he traveled with tens of thousands of people, a whole city, on the move. Wives, soldiers, cooks, servants, singers, thousands and thousands of them, strung out across the sand. And with him, around 100 camels, each one carrying heavy bags of gold. They say 500 servants walked out in front of him, and every single one carried a staff of solid gold. Just imagine standing by the road in the middle of nowhere and watching that go by. This glittering river of people and gold crossing the empty desert, you'd remember it for the rest of your life. And there's a sweet detail in the old accounts. It's said that wherever Musa and his caravan stopped for Friday prayers, he'd have a mosque built, right there, before they moved on. A trail of little mosques left behind him in the sand, marking the path of the richest pilgrim the world had ever seen. And everywhere he stopped, he gave the gold away. He couldn't help himself. He was generous to a fault. And then he reached the city of Cairo, in Egypt. And in Cairo, he really let loose. There's a good story from Cairo, too. When Musa arrived, the ruler of Egypt invited him to his palace. But there was a custom. Visitors were expected to kneel and bow before the sultan. And Musa, a great king in his own right, didn't want to kneel to anyone. For a while, there was an awkward standoff. In the end, the story goes, he found a graceful way around it. He bowed, but said he was bowing to God, not to the man. Even his manners were the manners of a king who answered to no one. And then he opened up his bags. He handed out gold to the officials, to the poor, to the shopkeepers, to anyone who came near. He spent, and he gave some more. And here's the wild part. He gave away so much gold in Egypt, flooded the place with so much of it, that the price of gold there actually crashed. Suddenly there was gold everywhere, so it was worth less. And, according to the stories, it stayed cheap for years afterwards. Think about that for a second. One man's spending money, his pocket change on a holiday, knocked the value of gold sideways for an entire nation. That's not a number on a list, that's just what happened. Now, some historians will tell you that story got a little bigger every time it was told, and they're probably right. But something real is in there. A man rich enough to move a country's economy just by passing through. And here's a little detail I love, because it makes him human. By the time Musa was heading home, he'd been so generous, given away so much, that he'd actually run a bit short. So he had to borrow gold, from the very merchants of Cairo he'd been showering with it days before. He paid it all back, of course. But even the richest man who ever lived, it turns out, could overspend on a holiday. But here's what I love about Musa. He didn't just spend that gold showing off, he built things with it. When he came home from his journey, he brought people back with him, artists, scholars, and, the story goes, an architect from Spain who he paid a small fortune in gold to design new buildings for his cities. And he poured that gold into two towns, Timbuktu and Gao. He built a great mosque out of mud brick that still stands to this day, 700 years later. You can go and see it, but the mosque was only the start, because Musa did something with Timbuktu that mattered far more than any building. He turned it into one of the great centers of learning in the whole world. He filled it with books. Now remember, this is a time when a single book had to be copied out by hand. Books were rare. Books were treasure. And in Timbuktu, they say, a good book could sell for more than gold. Scholars came from far away to study there and to teach. Great libraries grew up. A whole university. Just picture it. Out on the edge of the vast, empty Sahara, a city of gold and mud walls and tens of thousands of books. People came from across the world to learn there. For a while, Timbuktu wasn't the middle of nowhere. It was the middle of everything. And here's the wonderful part. Some of those books are still there. To this very day, in Timbuktu, families guard ancient handwritten manuscripts, some of them hundreds and hundreds of years old, passed carefully down the generations, fragile pages from that golden age still sitting out there in a quiet town at the edge of the Sahara. And that, really, was the thing Musa built, not just a pile of wealth, a place people would remember. So now you might be asking, if all of this happened 700 years ago, how do we even know about it? And that's a fair question, because honestly, we barely do. There are no photographs, no paintings from life. Almost everything we know comes from a small handful of Arab writers. And here's the funny thing, most of them never even met the man. One of them wrote it all down in Egypt, from stories other people told him years later. Another famous traveler did visit Mali, but only after Musa was already dead, when a different king was on the throne. So a lot of this story is half history, half legend, passed hand to hand, getting a little shinier each time. And that's okay. That's part of the magic of it. There is one picture, though. About 50 years after Musa died, a mapmaker in Europe drew a beautiful map, and down in the corner, in West Africa, he drew a king, sitting on a throne, a golden crown on his head, and in his hand, a big lump of gold held up like a jewel. That was Musa. That's how far his fame had traveled, all the way to Europe, onto a map, as the king made of gold. But I should be careful here. That mapmaker never saw Musa either. It's not a real portrait, it's just how a European artist imagined him, and the little caption calls him the richest king of those lands. Those lands, a local legend, not yet the richest man who ever lived. That part comes much, much later. Because after Musa, slowly, the whole thing came undone. He died around the year 1337, and even that we're not sure of. That's how thin the record is. We don't know exactly when the richest man in history died. After him, slowly, the empire of Mali began to fade. His sons and grandsons couldn't hold it together. Bit by bit, it shrank, and a new power, a kingdom called Songhai, rose up and took the great cities, Timbuktu and Gao, for itself. And then, a couple of hundred years later, the final blow came. From far to the north, an army marched all the way across the Sahara, thousands of miles of open desert, carrying something West Africa had never faced before: guns, cannons. And the defenders, brave as they were still fighting with swords and spears. It wasn't really a fair fight, and so the last of the great West African gold empires fell for good. The cities emptied of their glory, the trade routes shifted elsewhere, the great libraries of Timbuktu were scattered and lost. And that whole dazzling world, the caravans, the mosque, the city of books, slowly, quietly, faded out of the world's memory. And Musa faded with it. The richest man who ever lived just slipped out of the story. For hundreds of years outside of West Africa, Hardly anyone remembered his name at all. And then, something funny happened. Not long ago, in our own time, a website put out a list, the richest people in all of human history. And at the very top of that list, at number 1, above the old oil barons, above the banking families, above Bill Gates himself, was a name almost nobody recognized. Mansa Musa. The list even slapped a number on him. $400 billion. Now, was that number real? Not really. It was mostly a guess, a bit of fun, a way of saying richer than you can imagine. But it worked, because suddenly the internet lit up. Newspapers ran the story. Who is this? They asked. An unknown African king from 700 years ago, the richest person who ever lived? People couldn't believe it. Most had never heard the name in their lives. And just like that, after centuries in the dark, the world remembered him again. So here's the thing this story leaves you with. Musa had more gold than almost anyone in history. And where did it go? The gold scattered. The empire crumbled. His name was forgotten for hundreds of years. But the mosque he built? It's still standing. The city he filled with books? People still say its name, and the story itself, the king who gave away so much gold he shook the world, that story came back to life 700 years later. It's a funny lesson when you think about it. All that gold didn't keep his memory alive. The things he gave away did. The buildings, the books, the kindness on the road. And maybe that's the truest kind of rich there is. Not what you pile up and hold on to, because that scatters, in the end, for every one of us. Nobody takes the gold with them. But what you give away, what you build, what you leave behind for the people who come after you, that can last a very long time, longer than an empire, longer than a name. So, the next time you hear someone rattle off the richest people in the world, the billionaires, the tech founders, the big famous names, remember the king in the desert, the man who had more gold than any of them and gave most of it away. Whose empire crumbled and whose name was lost for centuries, and who is remembered today, in the end, not for what he kept, but for what he gave. Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived, forgotten by the world, and then, at last, remembered. We'll see you with another one very soon.